The little black box on the shelf above my desk has 3 blinking lights: green, green, amber. It has been blinking the same pattern for 6 years. I never thought about it. You probably never thought about yours either. But last winter, I noticed something I had been ignoring for a long time. My router was warm, not the plastic on top warm you expect from any electronic. Hot. Hot enough that when I lifted it off the shelf to dust behind it, I had to set it down quickly. I started wondering why a device that supposedly just shuffles data packets needed to dissipate that much heat. I almost let it go. Then I found something I should not have been able to find. It was a Federal Communications Commission, the FCC, filing. The number is FCC-ID, and every wireless device sold in the United States has one printed on a sticker on the bottom. Mine was a TP-Link Archer. I typed the ID into the FCC's public database, which most people do not know exists. What came back was a 60-page internal test report from 2019. Buried in Section 4 was a phrase that stopped me cold. Maximum effective isotropic radiated power, 1,000 milliwatts, restricted to manufacturer configuration. 1,000 milliwatts, et full watt. My router was shipped to me with a software lock holding it at 100 milliwatts. The hardware inside was rated for 10 times that. 10 times the broadcast power was sitting on my shelf, disabled in firmware, and nobody had ever told me. The document referenced an older ruling, a 2014 FCC amendment. I started pulling that thread, and the thread did not stop where I thought it would. The trail started in 1985. That is the year the FCC, under Chairman Mark Fowler, opened 3 blocks of the radio spectrum for unlicensed civilian use. The 900 MHz, 2.4 GHz, and 5.8 GHz bands. These were called the ISM bands, short for industrial, scientific, and medical. Before 1985, they were used for one thing almost exclusively: microwave ovens. Raytheon had been heating food with 2.4 GHz since Percy Spencer's patent in 1945. He noticed a chocolate bar melting in his pocket while he stood next to an active radar set. The FCC opened these bands to the public not because they were premium spectrum. They opened them because the military and the broadcasters did not want them. They were considered garbage frequencies, polluted by ovens and industrial sealers. Hand them to the hobbyists. The hobbyists did something nobody at the FCC expected. In 1991, an engineer named Vic Hayes, working at NCR Corporation in the Netherlands, began chairing a committee called IEEE 802.11. Hayes is the man most engineers credit as the father of Wi-Fi. You will not find his name in any consumer advertisement. By 1997, his committee published the first 802.11 standard, broadcasting at 2 megabits per second on the same 2.4 gigahertz band the microwave ovens were using. The transmission power was capped at 1 watt by international agreement. 1 full watt, remember that number. Then 1,999 happened. Apple released the iBook with what they called Airport. It was 802, 11B, 11 megabits per second, and it was the first time a normal person could buy wireless internet at a retail store. The cap was still 1 watt. Hardware manufacturers built radios that could hit that ceiling. But something quiet started happening between 2003 and 2007. The FCC, responding to lobbying from cellular carriers who were beginning to see Wi-Fi as competition for paid mobile data, issued a series of clarifications. Title 47, Part 15, Subpart C. The regulations did not lower the legal maximum. They added a new requirement. Manufacturers had to lock their devices in firmware to prevent the average consumer from accessing the full power their hardware could produce. The reason given in the filings was interference prevention. The result was that every router sold to an American household after 2007 was, by federal mandate, crippled out of the box. I want to be precise about what this means, because I had to read the rule 4 times before I believed it. The chip inside your router can broadcast at 1 full watt. That is the legal ceiling. The chip is sold by companies like Broadcom, Qualcomm Atheros, and MediaTek, and the datasheets are public. You can download them. The radio is capable. The antennas are capable. But when the firmware boots up, it reads a region code, sees US, and clamps the output to 100 milliwatts on the 2.4 gigahertz band, 10% of what the hardware can do. The reason this matters is simple physics. Doubling your transmit power roughly doubles your effective range in open air, and more than doubles it through walls. The signal that reaches the wall is stronger before the wall attenuates it. A router running at 1 watt instead of 100 milliwatts can reach the back of a 2-acre property. The same router, in the same physical box, sitting on your shelf right now, is being held to a radius of about 30 feet through drywall. This is the part where you can verify what I am telling you. Walk over to your router, look at the bottom, find the FCC ID. It will be a short alphanumeric string, usually starting with 2 letters. Go to the FCC website, click the section labeled OET, then EAS, then search by FCC ID. Type yours in. The test report will load as a PDF. Scroll to the section labeled Conducted Output Power or Maximum EIRP. You will see 2 numbers, the maximum the hardware can produce, and the value it was tested at for compliance. On most consumer routers sold in the United States, the gap between those 2 numbers is enormous. I have checked 6 different routers from 5 different manufacturers. Every single one was locked to a fraction of its rated capability. Every single one. The mechanism that holds it back is software. Just software. Inside every modern router is a small computer running an operating system, usually a stripped-down version of Linux. The transmit power is set by a configuration file. That file reads a value called the regulatory domain, and the regulatory domain tells the radio chip what its ceiling is. Change the regulatory domain, and you change the ceiling. This is not a theoretical exercise. There is an open-source firmware project called OpenWrt, which has been maintained since 2004 by a global community of network engineers. OpenWrt replaces the manufacturer's firmware with a clean Linux installation that gives you access to settings the manufacturer hid. It is free, it is legal to install on hardware you own, and on most routers manufactured in the last 10 years, it works. Here is how you do it, and I am going to be specific because vague instructions get people nowhere. First, go to the OpenWrt website and look up your exact router model in their table of hardware. If it is supported, the page will tell you which firmware file to download. The file is small, usually under 30 megabytes. Second, log into your router's admin page, which on most models is 192.168.1.1 or 192.168.0.1, using the password printed on the bottom. Third, find the firmware update section and upload the OpenWrt file. The router will reboot. This takes about 5 minutes. Fourth, log back in at the same address using the default OpenWrt credentials, which are root with no password. Fifth, go to the wireless settings and find the field labeled Transmit Power. On stock firmware, this field was either hidden or capped. On OpenWrt, you can set it to the maximum your hardware supports. Sixth, and this is the legal part, you remain responsible for operating within FCC regulations for your country. The hardware can do more than the law allows. The firmware no longer makes the decision for you. You do. The cost of this project is $0 if you already own a router. If you want to buy one specifically for this purpose, the most commonly recommended models on the OpenWrt forums are the Good Luck iNet Flint, around $160, or a used Netgear R7800, which goes for about $60 on eBay. Total time investment, about 45 minutes from download to a fully reconfigured network. The result, in my own house, was the elimination of 3 dead zones I had lived with for 6 years. My back porch went from 1 bar to full signal. The guest room above the garage, which had been a streaming graveyard, now pulls 80 megabits. Same router, same shelf, same antennas. The only thing that changed was a configuration file. I should have stopped the investigation there. I had the document, the history, the mechanism, and the fix. But there was one piece I had been holding on to, and I want to tell you about it now. It is the part that changed how I look at the box on my shelf. In 1941, a year before Percy Spencer's chocolate bar melted, an Austrian actress named Hedy Lamarr filed a patent in the United States. Patent number 2,292,387. She filed it jointly with a composer named George Antheil. The patent described a method for guiding torpedoes by rapidly hopping a radio signal across multiple frequencies so that the enemy could not jam it. The Navy received the patent, classified it, and shelved it. Lamarr was told her contribution would be more valuable if she sold war bonds with her face instead. She did. She raised $25 million in 1942 dollars, which is over $400 million today. The patent sat in a vault. It expired in 1959 without ever being used in a torpedo. But in 1962, during the Cuban Missile Crisis, the Navy finally deployed Lamarr's frequency hopping technique on ships enforcing the blockade. It was treated as classified military technology for another 20 years. The technique she invented is called spread spectrum. It is the core of every Wi-Fi signal broadcasting in your home right now. It is the reason the 2.4 GHz band can carry hundreds of devices without collapsing into noise. Hedy Lamarr was inducted into the National Inventors Hall of Fame in 2014. She died in 2000 in a small apartment in Florida, having received no royalties. Almost no recognition for the technology that now generates an estimated $150 billion in annual revenue for the global Wi-Fi industry. The router on your shelf is the great-grandchild of a torpedo guidance system. An actress invented it during the Second World War. The Navy locked it away as priceless. The FCC eventually released it to civilians on the cheapest frequencies they had. The manufacturers then crippled it in firmware, so you would buy a more expensive model when the cheap one underperformed. The hardware that could fill your entire property with signal is sitting 6 feet from you. It has been there the whole time. The lock is not in the metal. The lock is in a text file. The text file is yours to edit. 3. Blinking lights. Green, green, amber. I look at it differently now. So will you. Because once you see it, you cannot unsee it. The amber light is not a warning. It is a confession. It is the router admitting that somewhere inside its silicon brain, decisions are being made about you, for you, without you. The signal strength is throttled. The channel is auto-selected from a pool of 3, when 13 are technically available in most of the world. The transmission power is set to a fraction of what the antennas can handle. And the firmware that enforces all of this was written by an engineer in a cubicle in Taiwan or Shenzhen or San Jose. He was given a specification sheet that read, in plain corporate English, comply with regional regulatory defaults and do not exceed. Do not exceed. Those 3 words are the whole story. In 2016, a researcher named Eduardo Novella published a paper. More than 90% of consumer routers tested in the European Union were transmitting at less than half of their hardware-capable power, even in regions where higher power was legally permitted. The reason was simple. Manufacturers ship a single firmware image to dozens of countries to save on development costs. They configure that image to the most restrictive jurisdiction in the shipping region, then leave it there. A router sold in Madrid is throttled to comply with a rule written for a denser urban environment in Brussels. A router sold in rural Montana is throttled to comply with a rule written for downtown Tokyo. The defaults are not optimized for your home. They are optimized for the lawyer who signed off on the product launch. And here is where the story turns from accidental to deliberate. In 2014, the United States Federal Communications Commission issued a notice. Some manufacturers, in their attempt to lock down firmware against unauthorized modification, were also locking out legitimate users from adjusting perfectly legal settings. The FCC clarified, in a follow-up bulletin in 2016, that manufacturers were required to prevent illegal transmission, not to prevent all user modification. But the damage was done. Companies like TP-Link, Linksys, Netgear had already begun shipping routers with cryptographically signed firmware that refused to boot if the user installed open-source alternatives like DDWRT or OpenWRT. The lock was now in the bootloader. The text file I mentioned earlier had been moved behind a steel door, and the key had been thrown into the Pacific, but not on every model, and not on every firmware version, and not forever. The open-source community, populated by the same kind of stubborn, obsessive tinkerers who once jailbroke iPhones and rooted Android tablets, began reverse engineering the signing keys. They found undocumented serial console headers on the printed circuit boards. They published step-by-step guides for restoring user control. By 2019, there were active communities supporting over 400 router models with custom firmware that exposed every setting the manufacturer had hidden: transmission power, channel width, beamforming parameters, quality of service queues. Even the regulatory domain itself could be changed with a single command. This unlocked channels 12 and 13 inches North American hardware, channel 14 inches most of the world. It opened the entire upper portion of the 5 GHz band that is reserved for radar but mostly unused in residential areas. I am not telling you to do any of this. I am telling you that it exists. I am telling you that the device on your shelf has capabilities you paid for and were never permitted to use. I am telling you that the engineers who designed it know this, the regulators who approved it know this, and the executives who priced it know this. The only person in the entire supply chain who was kept in the dark was you. Consider the numbers. A typical consumer router has a hardware-capable transmission power of around 500 milliwatts. The factory firmware usually caps this at 100 milliwatts. That is a 5-fold reduction. In free space, Signal strength follows the inverse square law. Quintupling the transmission power roughly doubles the effective range. A router that struggles to reach your back bedroom on factory settings can, in many cases, blanket an entire house and a backyard with a single firmware adjustment. No new hardware, no mesh network, no expensive extenders. Just the device you already own, doing what it was always physically capable of doing. The counter-argument, and it is a real one, goes like this. If everyone unlocked their routers, the airwaves would become a battlefield. Neighbors would crank their power to drown each other out. The 2.4 GHz band, already crowded, would become unusable. There is a reason regulators set conservative defaults, and the reason is the tragedy of the commons. Spread spectrum, the very technique Hedy Lamarr invented, only works if everyone plays fair. If one router shouts at 10 watts while everyone else whispers at 100 milliwatts, the shouter wins, and the whisperers fall silent. This is true. I will not pretend otherwise. But it is also true that in most homes, in most neighborhoods, on most evenings, the spectrum is nowhere near saturated. Surveys conducted by the Wi-Fi Alliance between 2018 and 2022 found that the median residential 2.4 GHz environment was operating at less than 15% of theoretical channel capacity. There is room. There is enormous room. The defaults were calibrated for the worst-case scenario in a dense apartment block in Hong Kong, then applied uniformly to a farmhouse in Nebraska where the nearest neighbor is half a mile away. The one, size, fits, all approach guarantees that the farmhouse is underserved so that the apartment block is not catastrophically oversaturated. It is a reasonable compromise from a regulatory perspective and a terrible compromise from your personal perspective. Hedy Lamarr understood this kind of compromise.